Hey, this is Darius Ari for the American Institute for Roman Culture. Thank you so much for joining me for the decline and fall of Rome in today's context. Now, what I really want to talk to you about today isn't such a heavy handed academic lecture, but I want to ask these questions. Why Rome still matters? Was Rome forever or ever a model for an early America or America today? Look at the founding fathers. We'll look at the success of Roman antiquity, its long-term impact. I'd say it still has an impact in our lives today. Ultimately, why did Rome fall? And really looking at Rome in today's world. And we're panning here into the Roman Forum. The three columns there belong to the Temple of the Castors. The Forum Piazza is behind that brick building in the distance is the Curia, where the Senate traditionally met, pivoting past the little Temple of Vesta at the bottom of your screen, pivoting over to the remains of the Temple of Faustina and Antonius Pius, converted into a church, past the Atrium Vestae, the Vestal Virgin's home. There's the Basilica of Maxentius in the distance, and finally the Colosseum. So here's the heart of ancient Rome, just a glorious ruin that we can all still admire today. So let's take a look at these headlines today. The pandemic drags on. Let's not go there. Labor shortage, runaway inflation, infrastructure issues, massive migrations, climate change, forever wars in the Middle East. Now, are we looking at a newspaper of today? Well, a lot of those topics have been popping up in recent times, but let's look at it in the context of ancient Rome. And of course, we have the first documented pandemic by the physician Galen, the famous physician that lived in Rome and treated the emperors, including Marcus Aurelius. We have labor shortages that the Romans have dealt with, related to an agricultural crisis at different points of Rome's history. We have runaway inflation at many times in the Roman Empire, and maybe most famously, the response by the Emperor Diocletian, who decided to lay out the law and lay out the prices for commodities, for people's jobs. It's a fascinating document that failed because at that point, the coinage system had been so thoroughly debased, he had nothing really to back up those established costs, and inflation just really took off. Inflated social services. We can look at the discourse of bread and circuses and what the people of Rome expected over time more and more. Sometimes Romans dealt with massive problems in their infrastructure, of course, a lot of it relating to how to get the grain to Rome. What if there was a famine in the breadbasket, like happened on occasion in Egypt? And of course, the annona is that subsidy food system, the grain dole for the Roman citizens, that was critical to maintaining your discipline and the support of the masses in Rome itself. We're going to talk about massive migrations. Famously, the Goths cross into the empire, in the later empire, and we'll see what kind of repercussions happen from those outsiders settling within the boundaries of the empire. Climate change has been variously discussed in scholarship. There have been recent interpretations and reinterpretations of the data. Of course, sometimes the scholarship does look at the reality of North Africa post-Roman versus, of course, that picture that we get from the archaeological evidence of how rich and irrigated and lush parts of North Africa was, a far cry from the realities of today. Forever wars, where the Romans were always going up against the Persians, that is the Parthians, the Sassanid dynasties, and they remain a critical superpower, let's say, to the east of the Roman Empire. Now, are we Rome and the Roman Empire from the perspective of looking at us as Americans? And the answer is no, of course. I mean, look at this. They have slavery throughout the existence of the empire. Most people are really just living on, meager means and agricultural-based society by and large, with the exception of these mega cities. Infant mortality rate was massive, astounding death rates before the first number of years of life. The mortality rate of during childbirth, medicine was based upon what you saw with the naked eye. So I mean, it just was very rudimentary. There's no middle class per se. Issues of citizenship were different as well. I mean, ultimately, one of the famous things of the Romans is that they do give that citizenship up rather freely historically. And by 217, the Edict of Caracalla makes everyone in the empire a Roman citizen. And of course, looking at Rome from the perspective of America, where's our empire? Where's our conquered territory? Where's our extension of citizenship? I mean, obviously, apples to oranges is what it's always going to be. And yet, we can look at this discourse of the empire of the Romans as a sole superpower, a dominant military, a dominant economy, a dominant technology for so long, just laws, government. It worked. It worked for a very long time and created a long periods of uninterrupted peace from that dominance. And of course, that citizenship is an amazing thing that it also allowed substantial upward mobility. How many tombs do we have from the former slave, the former freedman, the former slave that becomes a citizen, woman, man, and then their children that can partake in that system of ancient Rome. It really was something amazing. And you think of the tired, the poor, the hungry arriving at Ellis Island and becoming part of a great ideal. There are certain ideas that are out there that we do find a connection with. So is it a model for America? I mean, for the founding fathers, they looked at Rome. They looked at doing better. They looked at having better checks and balances for peaceful transferal of power. And, that's pretty much what we have through our history. Whereas the Romans are not going to have that. They're going to have a breakdown in that republic. They're going to have ultimately tyranny with Julius Caesar, and then they're going to have the full-on dynasties established by one-man rule from Augustus and onward. But the founding fathers were looking at Rome as an ideal, and they were looking at the success of the republic in governance. They weren't looking at the Roman Empire. Obviously, they're making a distinction. And there's a critical image from the reenactment Gruppo Storico Romano there in Largo, Argentina. And Julius Caesar is played by a guy, he's a really nice guy, who's a computer engineer. But you get year by year, Mark Antony's getting older, everyone's getting older. And eventually now it's fun to see that some younger generations are stepping up into the scene, and they're really enacting here a number of scenes from Julius Caesar's, the production by William Shakespeare. They're doing it in Italian near the location of where that assassination took place. Here is that archaeological site. Get a 360 view here of Largo, Argentina, as we pivot into this being restored Republican sanctuary in recent days. Behind this round Temple B, I'm literally standing on the remains of the Curia where Julius Caesar himself was assassinated, but a fascinating window into Republican Rome. And of course, it's where you catch the bus in the heart of the city. So what is then the reason why we are so fascinated with Rome and in many ways so familiar with Rome? You've got the material remains of the city itself. Of course, we have another empire that has its capital in Rome, subsequent to antiquity, and that's the Catholic Church, the Holy Roman Empire. So much of what we have this appreciation for and knowledge of, the material of ancient Rome, is due to the fact that the church has preserved so much. And of course, out of that, we have the Renaissance and humanistic studies, and we have concepts, we have anecdotes, we have the maintaining of the manuscripts out of the Middle Ages into this period where people are really rediscovering those texts and learning the lives of those incredibly fascinating people and their actions, ideas of citizenship, civitas, libertas, freedom, power, the Commonwealth itself, that republic, and even also luxuria. They're going to learn about the excesses of this society that the Romans over time are going to be crescendoing in their literature, lamenting how how much better it used to be and how soft they'd become, and how everyone wasn't really didn't have the morals and the drive that the past generations had that made Rome so great. Those ideas stay with us today, and those moments in time, those anecdotes stay with us because of how much was rediscovered in the Renaissance times and helped then form for us throughout all of Europe, ultimately transferring over to the United States, these key terms and concepts. So out of all of that, the models of empire, the models of capital cities, well, it was Rome and Rome's empire. For the Franks, the Normans, the French, the Germans, the British, this is what you look to for success, excess, ultimate failure. And when we do step inside, here's a special visit inside the Vatican, inside the Sistine Chapel, reuse marble on the ground, and of course, new creations are coming out of the Renaissance, but so many of those figures are based upon the statuary, like the Laocoon, like the Torso Belvedere, that are recovered, they're rediscovered throughout the ruins of ancient Rome in the 16th century. So Rome is successful until it isn't. We'll talk about the decline and fall just shortly, but it's that span of empire. I mean, it's almost 2 million square miles. America is about 4.5, I think, square million miles. Huge land mass. How did they maintain it? How come the average person for centuries was enjoying the benefits of that established peace, the Pax Romana? In the political discourse, still today, you will hear about Pax Americana. What's that all about? Well, we go back to Pax Romana. And it's the success militarily. It's setting up a system and administration, setting up a peaceful coexistence. And people, by and large, it's going to be a lot of self-rule, still paying your due taxes or whatnot, but going on in your own community. There's a big part of that is the success from the Romans, that they're not necessarily so heavy-handed all the time everywhere. Of course, there are going to be lots of instances of revolt, like in Judea, that they're going to have to put down. But, by and large, there are many extended periods without warfare. And really, when we look at a lot of the later time frame, the later empire, so much of it is focused around people vying for power and being in control of the empire, more so initially than the dealing with the revolts and the invasions and so on. And there's single currency, there's free trade and travel, and by and large religious freedom. The road systems, the aqueducts, the sanitation we're in awe of. And of course, people had so much leisure time. But, by and large, with religious freedom, we can look at the Romans, we can look at that span of history, and there are instances. There's the Bacchanalian decree in the 2nd century BC. There are flare-ups where you're kicking out the astrologers, you're kicking out various populations, at some points the Jews, The you know people are singled out. Ultimately, we have Christianity, but Christianity or Judaism, by and large, is allowed to flourish. And Imperial Rome is going to have 12 synagogues in Trastevere. The realities of Christianity, of course, is that first initial Jesus following movement, religion initially, they are sometimes singled out. Think about the fire of 64, but at the same time, there are huge periods of time where there is no persecution, there is no direct confrontation, there is no interest. So so many opportunities for so many different religions, and of course, Rome, that metropolis of maybe 1 million people, it was multicultural. People are pouring into the city. You have that anecdote of the Orontes pouring into the Tiber. It's multicultural. Imagine the clothing, the dress, the customs, the languages that were to be heard in the streets of Imperial Rome. And then you have a lot of leisure at the culmination of some of this success, the games, the baths, and when did people enjoy that much leisure time? I mean, today, wow, we've made it because our kids are on TikTok for 12 hours a day. But back in the day, it was, well, it's the afternoon. I've had my lunch. I've done my business in the forum. I'm going to go to the baths for 3 hours and exercise and get a massage and play some board games or play a ball game and so on. So the Romans were indeed enjoying that success, and that success that went on for centuries. So it's a different time frame that we have to think about. So Rome, in so many ways, to us, it matters, and we can identify with them, and we can look at ourselves when we look at that material culture. And maybe we weren't brought up with the comedies, the satires, and political discourse, and we're in some undergraduate class or grade school reading Cicero's speeches, but for so much of history, so much of European history, from the Renaissance and onward, these conversations have become, commonplace. When we're looking at histories of Rome and of Europe, you're starting with a Livy, a Tacitus. Now, our outlook, of course, today is so fast, is so short, is so brief, as brief as a tweet. We're looking at quarterly reports. We're looking at unemployment reports. We are trying to get the pulse of what our reality is and how things are going. Things going well, things going bad. President has good poll numbers, president has bad poll numbers. What's happening out of that summit? But the Roman outlook, right, is longer, is centuries, and we can't really, comprehend that in the same way, as time is looked at differently. And of course, for the Romans, the outlook is, well, the people who came before us, they did more. They achieved more. They were better than us. And the lament is going to be eternal. We have it easier. We're not working as hard. We've gone soft, right? And that really sticks with them in their own discourse, in their own writings, in their own outlook. And it's your betters, the mos maiorum, the customs and traditions of your ancestors, the people that came before you, your betters, the people that are better than you, that you look to because it worked, and then it's up to you to follow and adhere to that reality and that success. That's how the Romans are going to be looking at it. Maximum empire. Look at this incredible extension of this, vast territories. It is filled with diversity, diverse language and backgrounds and gods and traditions and climates and just in local cultures, and all together they become Roman. and the imprint, the lasting impact of Rome is still felt in those areas. At the same time, those peoples, they maintain their own inherent cultural differences, recognition. You were an Athenian, and then you were a Greek, but then you might be that Roman citizen at the same time. And that's creating kind of multiple, it's like having multiple passports or something. But you knew who ultimately was in charge. And for a very long time, it was ancient Romans that imposed their laws, their language, and their tax system on those people. So again, how did Rome view its decline? Sure, there's going to be a decrease in external power in that, the maximum extent of the empire is under Trajan. It never is so good. Afterwards, you have an immediate withdrawal of some territories by Hadrian, who then judged that there had been overreach. You're also looking internally at your own workings of empire, and you focus a lot in the writings on this discourse of we're decadent, we're less than, we've gone soft. And the Romans of old, it's a cold bath once a week, maybe once a month. And of course, the imperial reality was cities have these bathing facilities, and we're spending countless hours there relaxing, getting massages and fraternizing and so on. It's in many ways, there's too much otium, there's too much leisure that people are enjoying. And of course, the very people that are writing about it, they're enjoying that as well. They're pointing the finger at the populace, they're pointing the finger at themselves. And they're bringing, they're spending countless amounts of money bringing in worthless items like the silks from China. And it's just, I can't live without that. I need that pepper from India to add to the flavor of a meal. So they just like we, in a certain way, like, well, we got by with 2 channels and now we have, 10,000 channels. And we got by with having, a phone in our house, and now, if we don't have that phone with us, our life falls apart. We're so decadent. So anyways, there's a lot of this lament. And the lament is happening early, and you can go all the way back to some of our earliest writers, because you don't really have Roman writing in a substantial way before the 2nd century BC. But here's Polybius writing at the time of the destruction of Carthage, and he's looking at governments, and he's looking at success historically, and he's having to evaluate and ultimately judge that Rome has the best system, better than the Greeks, better than Alexander the Great, better than the Carthaginians, but also realized and said that, all things are going to come to an end. And as, Scipio defeats and destroys Carthage, he weeps because he knows that one day the same thing is going to happen to his city of Rome. So they knew eventually that this would come to an end. But they're already complaining about it and worrying about it when they're destroying Carthage in the 2nd century BC. So you could say they had a good run, and it lasted quite a long time. So there is a great distinction in that ultimately united, expanded empire. And the West has one set of characteristics. The urbanization is really created from scratch by the Romans. And in the East, of course, it's a different reality because there are established kingdoms, there are megacities, there is heavy urbanization that will be inspiring to the Romans, but also then added to by the Romans. And they're looking at the cultural capitals in the Greek world, like Athens, as real points of focus and places that they highly respected. Now, obviously, pandemics are going to be a big factor, and there are implications then from the various plagues that hit Rome or hit throughout the empire. And of course, this resonates with us now because we're living through a pandemic. And I'll tell you, we started doing the free video lectures and seminars right with our first very brutal lockdown in Italy, if some of you remember, and it was quite severe. And I started doing these, and one of the things I had to talk about was the Antonine Plague, and that was probably one of our most popular seminars that we did. And ultimately, with core sampling of ice cores from Greenland that are substantially studied and further refined in these studies. A most recent analysis takes it down strip by strip, aligning it with year by year of history. And of course, we're fascinated with this because you have the various materials, the lead and whatnot, the toxins, they are wafting over from Europe and they're being deposited in the snow. And we see this huge uptick in industrialization in the Roman Empire in the 1st and 2nd centuries AD. And it really peaks right here and then dips substantially, it seems, right with that documented Antonine plague, this horrible plague that it just went on and on and on and would flare up again and go away and flare up again. So it's something that the Romans had experience on. And of course, Galen is famously writing about it and what it was, smallpox or whatnot. That's not the issue for us today, but it was a reality that these mega connected cities dealt with. I mean, we can ultimately criticize the kind of sanitation. I mean, obviously it was a wonder, and it's a wonder when we look at those systems and the aqueducts and we think about all that wastewater being flushed out into a river. That was pretty sophisticated, but at the same time, we know that it's not the sanitation of today, and there would have been a lot of spread very easily in these mega urban centers. So there's a kind of a double-edged sword when we're looking at the sophistication of the urban centers of the Roman Empire. And there are many, many failures for the empire. A lot of historical analysis, over 200 different individual ideas. Was it lead? Was it lack of sex? Was it poor hygiene? Various migrations, overstretching the limitation, the limits of the military. Is it because religion, changed dramatically? There are many, many ideas, and it's not going to be one thing. It's going to be multiple. And we're in the thick of change right now in our society. It's happening globally, it's happening locally, it's happening nationally. And it's hard to analyze that when you're in the thick of it. 20 years from now, 30 years from now, 40 years from now, the historians will say, and this is what happened. So we have that hindsight available to us when we look at Rome today. I mean, when Gibbon's writing his Decline and Fall of Rome, the first volume comes out in 1776, when you have the breakaway colonies from, in America from Britain. Well, what was that saying to him? When people are writing about the Roman Empire during the time of Nazi Germany, what kind of attitude is steeped into, giving insights to the historians like Syme. So what's going to happen to us today then, as we reflect on, the realities of pandemic and what kind of impact that had on the Roman Empire? So it's like, what kind of Rome are we reading about depends on what time in which it was produced, and this continues really forever. So one thing I want to lead you with, and we're going to do a quick walkthrough of some important historic moments, if you're not so familiar with them, or if you are familiar with them, then you have a walk through history. But Rome is resilient. Rome is dealing with new dangers, threats, breakaway kingdoms, invasions, and it's going to respond. And many times it successfully reconsolidates and reconstitutes itself. It's not going to happen all the time. So in the 3rd century, and we're going to go all the way to the 7th century or so, the concept of Rome is going to change. The location of Rome will change. Most famously from Rome to Constantinople, the New Rome it was called. Location will change. The ambitions and drive and the attitudes of the rulers will change. And of course, historians and their outlook will change. So couple decades ago or so, it really wasn't mainstream to talk about late antiquity, like 30, 40 years ago. Now it's standard as we're talking about the 4th century, the 5th century, and so on, before we're talking about the Middle Ages. So a new period has been identified, has been come to terms with, and the outlook then has changed. And at this point, there's even somebody writes a book called The Light Ages as opposed to the Dark Ages. So interpretations are about what's happening in this period of transition, what's happening in the twilight years of the Roman Empire. Is it a crash down and burn, decline and fall, and that's it? End of story? Is it transformative? Is it transitioning? Is it, becoming something different? Is your outlook going to be more negative or more positive? But let's face it. I mean, this is what I want you to face, is that there is going to be loss. There are going to be 9/11 moments. There are going to be traumatic, irreversible changes that take place, and the coherence, the cohesive nature, and the landmass of that empire will change, will deteriorate, will break apart, and ultimately be lost. I mean, these are the realities. There will be there's going to be massive impact from the migrations, particularly from the Goths. They're allowed to settle into the empire, but not become part of the empire. And these people are not becoming citizens. It's a different kind of reality. There will be many more invasions, and most of these breakaway kingdoms and so forth are forming in the West because of a different nature of the land, of the people, and the response, versus in the East, they're holding on longer. Constantinople will not fall until much later. You get to the sack of 1204 by the Crusaders, but then the Ottoman Empire is going to replace the remains of that Roman Empire. Sure, the historians call it Byzantium, a Byzantine Empire, but they consider themselves Romans. Didn't matter that they were speaking Greek. They were Romans. And so that identity lived on and on, even as the real empire was long gone. So we'll start here in the 3rd century. And yeah, there's turmoil. So when you're reading about 26 emperors in 50 years, it's kind of like looking at post-World War II Italy and the high turnover of government. Like 18 months, I think, is the average expectancy of an Italian government. Obviously, Draghi right now is doing a good job, man for the job right now. But imagine that you have this turnaround versus long-lived emperors and smooth successions from father to son. Here it is assassinations and stirrings of various factions of the armies and so forth. It's very, very bad. So a lot of internal turmoil. You have the rise of the Sassanid dynasty, replacing the Parthians, killing an emperor in battle. Very bad. That's one of those 9/11 moments. You have breakaway kingdoms. I'll say a little bit more of that in the next slide. But just to imagine that a fragmentation of that empire is already taking place in the 3rd century. Walls are being thrown up everywhere around urban centers, most famously around Rome itself in the 270s. That's the biggest monument that you find in Rome today, a 12-mile circuit. But it ends with consolidation. It ends with multiple capitals. It ends with Diocletian, who then increases the bureaucracy. He subdivides and further subdivides the provinces into smaller components so there can be less rebellion on the part of the generals. He himself has a larger and larger and larger standing army, and of course he and his colleagues will be spread throughout that empire to run it better. But then you have a huge uptick in the bureaucracy and the cost of that government to maintain, to bring order, to take them out of those darker times in the previous generations. So there's a lot of change, and really one of those key figures in the early empire is Augustus and what he establishes with succession, what he establishes with how to administer the empire. And now another massive turning point is under Diocletian. And of course, what he creates is not replicated. And we're going to go back to one-man rule very quickly. But just a slide on the breakaway kingdoms, the Gallic Empire in the west, the Palmyrene Empire in the east. And, they're, for a while, independent entities, but not really challenging the Roman Empire. It's just they're doing the job that the empire couldn't do itself. And ultimately, there will be this consolidation of all these territories very quickly under Aurelian, who also builds the walls. And it's a successful enterprise, but it just speaks to the realities of the 3rd century. So Rome didn't need walls for 30 years, for 800 years since the Gallic sack, and now you need it again. Times had indeed changed, and it's happening all over the empire. And just means that crime is up, and invading armies are a bigger reality. And let's even be afraid for the heart of the empire, the capital city. So that reality and that need for those walls won't go away. And Rome ultimately, even with those walls, is sacked again and again and again. 410 and 455, and we can just go forward in time. The sack of 1527, Charles V. It is a necessity for the rest of Rome's existence until the unification of Italy. 4th century. Well, the big protagonist here, of course, is going to be Constantine, the Milvian Bridge, victory over Maxentius, the legalization of Christianity. But make no mistake, maybe 30% of the empire at that point was Christian, but most people weren't. Paganism doesn't end with the Edict of Milan. It's going to take another really full century to snuff out those ancient practices, those temple reconstructions, those offerings at the altar. And his legacy is obviously a new Rome, but it's a Rome that's based upon the model, the old original city. 7 hills, palace next to a chariot racing track, the Circus Maximus in Rome, and of course the Hippodrome in Constantinople. You can still see the imprint of that by the Hagia Sophia. And he, again, was this incredible game changer. But, historically, we're looking at dates, we're looking at change, but it's happening over the impact of his decisions will go on for generations. And again, the old gods are not so easily or immediately snuffed out. And slavery continues. Some of the best slave collars and tags that we have from the ancient world, they're dating to the 4th and 5th centuries AD. So again, the realities that really were on the ground throughout the empire, they weren't so different in the 4th and 5th centuries from the 2nd and 3rd in so many ways. 5th century. Well, now we have a lot of incredibly complex documentation of various incursions within the boundaries then. So at a certain point in 217, everyone in the empire is a citizen. So if you're coming from the outside and even settling, the Vandals, the Goths, the Visigoths, no one's allowed at that point to become a citizen. You just remain the outsider that could be persecuted, the outsider that could be bribed into assisting the Roman government to be a part of the army, to go against another group, So it really is a different kind of touch and go system, and it leads to a lot of challenges to the integrity of the empire. So Goths are settling in, and then the Goths, left alone or harassed, sometimes fighting for the Roman army, ultimately are going to fight against the Roman army. And this Battle of Adrianople is another 9/11 moment, another critical loss for the Romans. But then you get sometimes that strong, righteous leader, Theodosius, who sets things right again. But then you get weakness, and then you get the internal strife within the government. And Stilicho, the competent general, was considered a threat to the emperor, and is ultimately put to death. But he was the one that was holding off Alaric the Goth, who then comes in and sacks Rome in 410. Ultimately, the culmination of that success, and that, again, shot heard around the world. Rome has been sacked, even though Rome's no longer the main capital. It still is a big deal. Though that success of Alaric leads to the Goths being allowed to settle and claim their own territory permanently within the empire, but they're not becoming Roman citizens. So it's a new reality. The Vandals come in. They'll ultimately sack Rome in 455. Then comes Attila the Hun, who doesn't sack Rome. He avoids it because of the malaria, but he does tear through the heart of the empire. So you're getting many invasions, many migrations, settlement of outsiders into the empire, unwanted but ultimately begrudgingly allowed in, and you're getting a lot of horrific successes on the part of the non-Romans within the empire. But Constantinople is going to stand out. And Justinian is one of those pivotal figures who is going to be benefiting from the privileged location of Constantinople. It's just got a series of long walls. It's going to stave off attacks. It's got water on three sides, and it is able to fend for itself in a way that Rome never could. Now, he's going to revise Roman law. He's going to build and rebuild Hagia Sophia. That was a rebuild of Theodosius's Hagia Sophia. He's going to go over to the west and challenge those de facto Gothic kings that are now ruling parts of Italy and beyond, sending his general to conquer the Vandals in North Africa and then reconquer Italy. And his general is Belisarius, and then ultimately Narses. But there's massive devastation from those wars. And you can see here in the maps just how brutal the early decades of the 6th century were. And then the culmination is going to be a short-term success and long-term failure to reunite East with West. And so this map here in the red is showing you what Justinian starts off with in the red, and he's heading over to the west, and he's got a partial successful reclaiming of the west, but he never really can pull it off. So it means that the end of the story, the end of this tale of the Roman Empire, is that you're going to have permanent loss. And the vacuum isn't filled by another empire. The vacuum is filled by these smaller factions, these smaller groups that then embark upon nation building. And we're going to get out of that the Spain, the Portugal, the Germany, the France, and so on. But Italy, for the successive centuries, will be chopped up into smaller bits. And then we'll get the rise of these powerful city-states in the Middle Ages, like Venice and in Florence. But coming back to that short-term success of Justinian, this massive invasion by the Lombards, who will never leave, really is another nail in the coffin of this dream of reuniting the East with West. Then you get something totally unexpected. You get the rise of a new religion, and that is going to be Islam, and it will lead to the Battle of Yarmouk, and you're going to get the loss forever of Syria. I mean, we're talking about the extended region of Syria for the Romans, not just the small country of Syria today. You're going to get the annihilation of the Persian Empire. You're going to get the attack of Constantinople that isn't sacked, that holds off because of its geographical location and its great fortifications. But the Arabs continue and take out rapidly North Africa, invading Spain. Now we're getting into the 8th century and kind of the end of our story, but that lower map there is kind of the reality of the extent of the power, what the historians call Byzantium, the Byzantine Empire. And it's a poor substitute for that original map that we have of Trajan and the great extent of the empire. But those people remind themselves, tell themselves, write about themselves as Romans, still in the East, still speaking Greek. So they have that legacy of Rome. They have that the dream of the grandeur of that empire, and yet it's a totally different reality in the world of the 8th century. And then we start to talk about the Middle Ages. And yet through it all, and obviously us today in the 21st century, Rome is eternal, and we can connect to ideas of citizenship, freedom. We can connect with the art that's left behind, the architecture, concepts of government and failure, terminology like dictatorship and tyranny, and figures like Julius Caesar, and dates, the Ides of March, the Fire of 64, the sack of Rome by Alaric the Goth, the battle at the Milvian Bridge leading to the legalization of Christianity. So these things stick out, these moments in time resonate, we learn about them, maybe we forget about them afterwards, but these are by and large grand moments that didn't just have an impact on Rome, it had an impact upon its entire empire, and of course is transmitted to us today, again through the learnings and the teachings and the studies in the Renaissance times, and then steeped into the realities of the various countries that formed out of the framework of the Roman Empire, and then over to the founding of our republic. And we can go to Hollywood, and this is Cinecittà, Rome's Hollywood, and we can be fascinated with these reconstructions on a smaller scale, but do give us a sense of that grandeur and that success and those concepts that took place in front of these kinds of monuments. There's a recreation there of the Roman Forum that we started off with. Of course, the Colosseum, that's going to get its own floor, is going to be capturing our imagination, thinking about the brutality of the Roman world, the gladiators that are fighting for entertainment. It's a kind of natural order of things according to the Romans, with the Romans on top dictating who dies and who lives. And then lots of irony when the gladiators can become superstars and can become very wealthy and are grand celebrities, even though still remaining slaves. So a lot of incredible inconsistencies within this system, and again a lot of upward mobility, and leading to the creation of almost a middle class conceptually, right? This merchant class, this group that's the urban population that's benefiting greatly from the realities provided by empire, and you won't see again for 1,000 years. We'll look over here to the Circus Maximus. On a beautiful day, that connection between the palace on the Palatine Hill and the Circus Maximus. How large is the largest venue in the United States? I was asking that in a lecture last night, and maybe it's 100,000, 120,000. Here we're looking at about 2 to 250,000. So potentially a quarter of the population at any given time could be yelling up at the emperor asking for 5 more days of chariot races, for example. But they could communicate and did communicate their pleasure or displeasure with the actions of the emperors. It was a real moment where the masses would, to say dangerously, provocatively speak out. And there was so much power in that. So you remove the democratic component of the republic. Men were no longer voting for people in office. They were being appointed. But here you could still voice your concerns. And I will add that, we have so many seminars lined up. We're going to have a whole roster coming out this month of the new seminars, the master classes, and we did debut our first Pompeii video, and all this is going to be accessible to you today as well. And look out for more of that kind of content. We are filming, I think, some extraordinary places. We have great partnerships. We're allowed to produce exceptional educational content, and we do need your help. We do need your participation and support. We're also going to share with you today a little teaser of a documentary we want to create walking along the Via Appia. We have the use of a drone, we have access, we have our capacity to storytell. And again, in the month of December, we ask for you to consider your support for us, to share your enthusiasm so that we can bring more of this kind of knowledge and experience and visualization of ancient Rome and the conversation to a larger audience, not just in America, but throughout the world, on our site, ancientromelive.org, as well as our YouTube channel. And I leave you with one of my favorite things, which is the interior of the Pantheon with the rain on an empty day. The grandest temple preserved from ancient Roman times, the freestanding concrete dome that still resists. It's a true sense of just how eternal the city is and a lot of those concepts of that former empire. So thanks very much. Thanks for tuning in. I'm going to give you separate links for the first Pompeii video. I'd love your feedback. I'm going to give you the video teaser on the Via Appia. And I would just love your feedback. And you also have my sincere apology for the problems. I consider myself a Zoom expert, but we had some problems yesterday. I appreciate your patience, and I hope you enjoyed this lecture and enjoy many more. And please give us feedback as well as to what new content you'd like us to produce in 2022.